50,000 people used to live here. Now it's a ghost town.
What's happening? My name is occasionally goukigod, and in this video I want to talk about Modern Warfare Remastered and why you should potentially not be all that excited. I think the hype train has got a little bit out of control with this game. I mean, it's got way more hype than Infinite Warfare, which is the bigger title coming out this year. And what I want to drill into in this video is the hype justified? Are we excited about a game that is truly going to be as awesome as we think it is? Or are we getting ourselves overly hyped for something that may not end up being all that spectacular? I think a lot of the hype surrounding this game is due to the fact that people are not so excited about Infinite Warfare. But I suspect a lot of the anticipation and excitement about Call of Duty 4 Remastered is that people are looking back at the past through thick, glossy nostalgia glasses. They're remembering things with a rose-tinted hue, and people do have a tendency to remember things being better than they were. Now, I play Call of Duty 4 quite often, and while I like it, it's definitely not my favourite Call of Duty game to date. It's certainly still up there, but that's why I felt compelled to make this video. And I think in these situations, it's definitely worth keeping your expectations in check, and it's also worth playing devil's advocate. So that's what I'm going to be doing right now. So firstly, what do we know about Modern Warfare Remastered? Well, we know it's going to be developed by Raven Software, and a lot of people think that that's actually a bad thing because who are Raven Software? They're not one of the big three developers that develop Call of Duty in a 3-year cycle. But Raven Software have been around since 1990, and they've been a partner or part of the Activision family since 1997. They've been actively involved in the Call of Duty franchise since 2010, which is Black Ops. So these guys have a huge amount of experience with shooters, and they've helped develop standalone games as well, most recently Call of Duty Online. But if you go a little bit further back, you've got games like Quake 4 and the 2009 reboot of Wolfenstein, which was not great, but still a solid shooter. If you go back even further, these guys developed Hexen and Heretic. That's if you're old enough to remember those games. So I think it's safe to assume that these guys know what they're doing when it comes to developing a game. And they're not actually developing this game from scratch, obviously they're just remastering the original. And they've said countless times that they're not going to be changing the gameplay. They're not altering things like the kill streaks, the weapons, the modes, or any of that sort of stuff. As far as the gameplay is concerned, it should play exactly like the original. Now the visuals is the one area where they are making massive changes. Now they're not just running the textures in HD either. They're basically remodeling the character models, the maps, the weapons, and pretty much most of the assets in the game. Now there will be some slight visual differences to the original. For instance, the maps may look slightly different to the originals, but they'll fundamentally remain the same from a structural point of view. Basically what they're doing is adding a shit ton more detail to the game. On top of this, there's going to be better lighting, dynamic lighting, new character animations, and brand new high resolution textures. They've also remastered the audio, which is one thing that I'm really interested to see what they've done. The original game's audio still stands up quite well, so I'm interested to hear how they've changed it. Maybe they're adding dynamic audio, maybe something closer to the newer games, maybe something even better. We'll have to wait and see. The last thing that we know for sure is that the game will have dedicated servers. This is one of the problems with the original game. If the host decided to leave the game would just end. Now obviously all of this sounds really exciting, and I can understand why there's a huge amount of hype surrounding the game, but I'm not too sure that there's that many people actively playing the game at the moment. I play on 360 and I play quite frequently, and there isn't really all that many people on it. Now you could argue that that's because of hackers, but you could also say that it's because people lost interest or have migrated onto new games. The point is, I don't think there's a huge amount of love for the original game in the sense that people love it so much that they want to play it on a regular basis. So I think that a lot of people that are looking back on the game with rose-tinted glasses on probably haven't played it recently and are basing it on their previous experiences with the game, which like I said could be somewhat skewed. Now don't get me wrong, Call of Duty 4 was definitely revolutionary at the time, but compared to more recent entries in the franchise, Call of Duty 4 is pretty bare bones. I mean, you have to remember that before Call of Duty 4 we didn't have kill streaks or perks or even the prestige system. These were all pretty mind-blowing back in 2007, but these days they're so common that I don't think they would really raise an eyebrow. So I think the initial wow factor of the game being really visually pretty is going to wear off very quickly, particularly with so few multiplayer maps, which I'll touch on in a minute. So what are some of the positives of this remaster? Well, the visuals is obviously the biggest enhancement from the original game. The original Call of Duty 4 is looking incredibly dated now. Another big positive is finding games should be much easier, particularly for me living in Australia where usually I have to play on 1 to 2 bars, which is incredibly frustrating. I think also when the game releases we'll see a big influx of players, and it will certainly be nice to play without hackers, at least in the short term. As I mentioned before, dedicated servers should improve the entire experience. It should make the connections better, there should be less dropouts, and hopefully across the board we'll have a pretty lag-free experience. Now on the flip side of that, there's definitely some negatives to take into consideration. The biggest one is probably that there's only going to be 10 maps of the original 16. Now they may decide to add more DLC maps down the road, some of the originals, or maybe some of the maps from the original DLC packs, but I certainly wouldn't expect them to be free, and I certainly won't be holding my breath for them to come out at all. With this few maps, I think the game has the potential to become old very quickly. You got to remember that a lot of people coming back to play this game have played those maps a lot, and they've played them to absolute death. So to have almost half of the original maps available, I think the experience is going to get old super fast. Now, as I mentioned before, the gameplay hasn't changed. Now, this is for better or for worse. I think arguably it's mostly for the better. If it felt different, if it played differently, it wouldn't be the original Modern Warfare. But that being said, there's a bunch of different annoying things that'll come back, which were annoying back in the day, and they'll certainly be annoying again. Things like martyrdom, the 3x nades, Juggernaut, and the Last Stand, I am really not looking forward to. The other thing with so many veterans coming back to play the game, it might not be all that accessible for new players. People who were playing the game almost 10 years ago know all the different spots, all the different places you can head glitch, all the different hidey holds. The camping I think is going to be insane. So I think jumping into the multiplayer as someone who's never played the game before is going to be a bit of an eye-opening experience. And also, like I mentioned before, Call of Duty 4 is very basic compared to the more recent titles. There's way less freedom and there's way less customization options in terms of class setup. There's no avatar customization, you can only have one attachment per weapons, you can't have multiple perks, there's only 3 kill streaks that you can't change the order. So I think for a lot of people, particularly new players to the game is going to feel really bare bones. People bitch and moan about the more recent games, but I think people take a lot of the new features for granted. My biggest bugbear from going from the new games back to the old games is no pick 10 system or pick 13 or some system that allows you to customize your loadout. Call of Duty 4 even has some attachments which sacrifice your first perk slot, so there's definitely a big difference between this game and some of the more recent titles. I guess on the positive side, a lot of these negatives are already known. We're not going blindly into a new game and not knowing what's going to be good and what's going to be bad, so perhaps that'll make the negatives more bearable. I think if you go into it with your expectations of the remastered just being a much prettier version of the original, and not expecting more from it is probably the best way to go about it. Judging by all the screenshots and the short gameplay videos that I've seen, it does look incredibly pretty. But my suspicion is that its popularity is just going to be a flash in the pan, and I think that it's been deliberately designed that way. I think that if they gave us all the 16 multiplayer maps, and the DLC maps as well, that people would probably play this more than Infinite Warfare, and they definitely don't want that. Anyway, let me know what you think, particularly if you're someone who's super hyped for this game. Let me know why you're excited about the game and why you think other people should be hyped as well. Anyway, that's all I've got for you in this video. I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm out.